Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Learning Collective sessions of this morning. I hope you were able to catch Art, Work, and Teens and Duncan Welder's session this morning about driving retention with learning technology. And if you were not able to or would like to catch the replay, don't forget that it remains right here on the RISC Facebook page and will also be moved over to our YouTube channel later this week for easy access at any time. Should you wish to view and beef up on XAPI and all that more learning technology. And speaking of learning technology, this morning's presenter, Chad Udell with Float, is going to be talking about how enterprises can leverage emerging technologies and overcome the challenge of the shock of the new. So welcome again. I am Ann Wynn, the marketing specialist at RISC Inc. And this morning, as I mentioned, we've got Chad Udell with Float, and I'm very excited to have him here. Not only is he a great presenter and industry leader, but he's also a friend of RISC. So I'm going to read you a short bio about Chad in case anyone is not familiar with who he is, but I highly doubt that he really needs an introduction. So Chad is the award-winning managing partner, strategy, and new product development at Float. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies and government agencies to create experiences for 20 years. Chad is an expert in mobile design and development and speaks at events on related topics. He's author of Learning Everywhere, How Mobile Content Strategies Are Transforming Training, and co-editor author with Gary Udell of Mastering Mobile Learning Tips and Techniques for Success. And his latest book, Shock of the New, co-authored with Gary, was released in April of 2019. So here we are. Welcome, Chad. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Of course. Thank you very much, Ann, for having me. Thank you to all the folks at RISC as well. Unfortunately, didn't get to see you a couple weeks ago in Orlando with the canceled learning solutions, but it's always nice to run into you and other friends at those types of events. And I think it's really great that you guys are doing some level of virtual connection in order to help these conversations continue to take place, even with things as crazy as they are. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. So, we found it important to keep our community connected during this time. And so without further ado, I am going to bring up your presentation because I'm excited to hear it and see it as well. Take it away.
Excellent. Yeah, so thank you very much. And today we'll be covering off on some topics that are shocking, regardless of the
favored and viewed as.
We seem to be having some problems with your audio for a second there. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I wasn't sure what it was. So.
Yep. So I'm going to cover off some topics that are in the book, and I'm just going to go full screen. So if there is some chat that I miss here, I apologize. I'm not trying to overrun your questions or comments. I will hopefully get a little time at the end here to go over things. So what I wanted to do today was fill you in a little bit on the title itself and some of the topics, and give you some vital tools that you could use to help yourself in evaluating new technology. And gave you a great introduction already, so I won't drain this. But Shock of the New is my third book. Learning Everywhere, How Mobile Content Strategies Are Transforming Training came out in 2012. And then Mastering Mobile Learning came out in 2014. Co-author of Shock of the New with Gary Udell, the late Gary Udell. He passed away last year in the fall after battling cancer for a number of years. Tremendous collaborator, tremendous co-author, tremendous co-worker and colleague. Miss him very much. And it's always an awesome privilege to get a chance to talk about and present on these topics that we held very near and dear to ourselves. So shout out to Gary. Today, what we're going to talk about is how to create some more informed decision-making processes for buying technology in general, how to understand this concept of business value for emerging technologies, how user experience is reshaping it, how this is impacting our coworkers, how these learning models can be used and leveraged, what dependencies might need to be put in place, and what signals are in there. And we are actually creating a little bit of an anagram there called builds, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So I think it's very clear that technology is accelerating, that the world is really speeding up, especially in terms of adoption of meetings, adoption of technologies and tools. I've got a 9-year-old upstairs right now that is having a Zoom meeting with the rest of his classmates. So I don't think we would have seen that even just a couple of months ago. Technology adoption, technology introduction is accelerating. And we see this as a trend that is taking across all industries. Just in general, technologies adoption is accelerating. And some of this is an additive effect. You know, we stand on the shoulders of giant. We would not be able to do Zoom meetings or these types of virtual presentations as prevalently as we are right now if it weren't for things like Wi-Fi and the internet and webcams and all of those other types of technologies that combine to make these amazing things possible. When we talk about emerging technologies at Float, we are talking about specifically technologies that are not yet mainstream, meaning really as soon as you can kind of, I guess, easily order it off of Amazon, have it show up a few days later, go to Best Buy and pick it up, or even say, for example, you see it in widespread use across people's living rooms and in every office. It's no longer an emerging piece of technology. So the types of things that we're talking about here, I like to keep track of it with the Gartner hype cycle. This seems to be a pretty good annual way of tracking technologies. What I want to draw your attention to here in particular is a few technologies that we dub emerging in the learning space, like virtual reality and augmented reality. If you look at them on this chart, they are currently in 2017, they were in the trough of disillusionment, and VR was in the slope of enlightenment. And as we move through from 2017 to 2018, track where those technologies go, but then also take a look. So if you look at peak of inflated expectations, we've got machine learning, deep learning, connected homes, so on and so forth. Pick a couple of those other technologies and see how they move through this process. In 2018, this is the year essentially that the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift really started to become very, very prevalent. PS4's VR. Virtual reality has moved out of emerging technology altogether because it is widely available. It's ubiquitous. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, is the Gibson quote. But in the case of VR, it was evenly distributed enough where it was no longer considered to be future tech. AR is still a little bit on the trough of disillusionment. I think we saw the things with Google Tango, Google's AR package, as well as Apple's AR kit, kind of just gets introduced, but it's not really making huge waves. People are wrestling with what they can do with it, what the actual use cases are, and so on and so forth. And then as we move into 2019, we get things like AR is just gone. Like it's no longer an emerging technology at all because we're using it everywhere. It's in our Amazon app. I could fire up the Amazon app and view what the television is going to look like on my wall, or see if this couch in the Wayfair app is going to fit within my living room. As soon as it becomes that type of prevalence, it is no longer emerging technology. It is emerged or emergent. It's available widely, and people are able to interact with it and use it in their day-to-day. Now, I know that you're saying and thinking in learning and development, things move a little bit more slowly, and it's still an emerging technology in our space. And I wouldn't want to argue too much with that. Like, I think at that point, we're just kind of quabbling over minor details. But I think we would all probably recognize that as soon as it gets to the boardroom, as soon as it's technology that is available in a B2C type of marketplace, we should take a look at this as saying this is acceptable and usable technology, and we should be looking at ways to leverage it and use it in our learning and development field as well. So the thing that I like to consider as I sip my coffee here, is that training technology or trying any technology is always somewhat of a bet. You know, we are putting chips on a board. We're moving things around. We're exchanging our time, our effort, our money, and our resources for trialing and working with technologies that we don't necessarily know is going to work. I'm sure that all of us has gotten burned by some technology at one point or another, whether it be buying that beta player as opposed to the VHS back in the day, or a laser disc, or maybe you spent a lot of time in Second Life. I don't want to bring up any PTSD or traumatic memories of technology that you may have failed within, but maybe you bought Palm Pilots or something along those lines, and they just didn't, you know, stick. It just didn't land, and it didn't resonate, and it didn't reshape your life. But just as many times as bets fail, there are so many that do, I think, reshape how we do our work, right? Cruise control in a vehicle. You know, I mean, you can't even buy a car that doesn't have cruise control. Backup cameras in cars, airbags, those types of technologies continue to advance in transportation. Smartphones as an evolution from the other phone, flip phones and things like that, right? So there are technologies that do win. You know, laptop computers have basically all but replaced desktop computers for virtually all PC users, except for those that need extreme hardware, dominance in terms of gaming or editing or video or, you know, so on and so forth. Some things to consider, though, is that choosing these tech is always a balancing act. You don't want to have paralysis. You don't want to say, I can't buy this technology because it might fail. Because you do have to look at it on the other end of it. I need some level of competitive advantage. I need to get ahead of my the companies that are in this field. I need to make my company attractive to new hires and so on and so forth. I need to make my workforce more productive. I need to get more of a leg up in whatever shape or form that might take. So you cannot just sit and say, I can't take bets because they might lose. But we do want to find a way to make these bets a little bit more effective, you know, to just increase our success rate from that 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 8 kind of ratio into more of a 50-50 or maybe even a 2 out of 3 is going to work. We want to be able to find a way to reliably innovate. We want to find a way to also safely innovate and advance our cause in our organization and our companies. This is not a skill that is easily taught. You know, entrepreneurial sense is not something that a lot of folks have by default. Coming from a space of being adventurous or a risk, non-risk averse, you know, being able to take these types of choices and chances is not something that a lot of folks come prepared with. And just innovation in general is not something that's easily taught. If you've seen folks like Dean Kamen speak or, Mitch Ebling, Mick Ebling, it's clear that not everybody has that spark, right? So how do we introduce that into our workforce? And how do we introduce that into our day-to-day at our learning and development jobs? You do have to reach. You do have to move forward. You do have to assume that there will be some level of risk, but you want to be able to do it in a controlled format. So you can operate this a little bit like a science experiment, but this is also an approach that oftentimes is not appropriate or available to us at an enterprise. I would imagine that if you spend some money, if you are going to be using some budgets, resources, talent, tools, etc. at your organization, that your management is not going to want to have you do multivariate or A/B testing, where some people get the advanced technology and some people don't, right? You don't run your business like an experiment in that regard. You may be able to reap the benefits of experimentation and research that has been done either in university or government programs or something like that. But I would be imagining that if you're in a Fortune 500 company, oftentimes you're probably resistant or reticent to use your staff as guinea pigs. Now, you might do it across certain business units, or you might do it in certain roles. But if you had, say, for example, service techs at one installation, you're not going to have some of the service techs get that work and some not. It's just probably not going to happen. I'm talking in a research fashion, not in a pilot fashion. Now, pilots are a different thing. We can get into some of that later if you'd like to, but pilots are proving not about will this learning work, but rather will this technology be scalable? Will this technology be something that we can use and introduce across our entire enterprise? You do have to realize that there will be some work that doesn't win, some prototypes that aren't useful. There will be some technologies that fail, and you should be able to be signaling and working with your management, your executives, to let them know that we're going to do our very best to have success. Here are going to be some of the KPIs that we're going to be measuring against, but we need to know that some of these things that we are doing might not be clear winners. And that type of broadcasting, that type of messaging early on in the project is so very vital in order to make sure that you'll be able to go and do these types of experiments later. So what I'm trying to give you through Shaka the New is a process to predict these winners, to be able to more effectively forecast when things are going to work, and possibly even avoid some of those landmines that might be out there in terms of technologies. There are some tools that exist to understand the technology's pluses and drawbacks, but the ones that were out there prior to us creating Shaka the New seem to have a far more drawbacks than they did pros. And so we decided to go out kind of on our own and create our own framework for this. A really well-known one is the TRL, or Technology Readiness Level. This is a US government standard that was conceived originally in 1974 for NASA. And it was formalized and put into widespread government use, not just in NASA, but across in military use, DoD, as well as others in 1989. It's widespread. It's used very frequently. If you interact with the Small Business Innovation Research Programs, SBIRs for short, SBIR, you'll see this TRL levels referenced. If you interact with government proposals, on Fed BizOps or something along those lines, you'll see it referenced from time to time. How it works essentially is that TRL 0 would be like the idea doesn't really quite even exist. Like TRL 0.5 would be like maybe it's a shower thought that an engineer or a scientist had, or maybe they're thinking about it when they're just ideating. Number one is when they embark upon those research topics, and then they go through a process. Is this feasible? Can I actually do this? Can we develop technology that might actually work? In 6 and 7, we're putting it out into the field and trying it out with pilots and prototypes. And 8 and 9, by the time you get to 9, it is stable. It is widely deployable. It's available everywhere. It's safe. It's dependable. It's something that we could put on the space station or into a fighter jet and know that it's going to work time after time after time. Okay, so these types of technology readiness levels can indicate how ready a technology might be in terms of widespread deployment. But by the time technology reaches our realm in the learning and development field, it is already at least at a 6 or a 7, if not an 8 or a 9, right? So we don't even get the added benefits of being able to forecast or work within these lower, more experimental technologies. And so when we see this in the space and hear innovators talking about it, oftentimes at 4, 5, and 6, that technology demonstration area, they'll call that the valley of death. This is where the trough of disillusionment gets the best of the technologies. It fades into the distance and it becomes nothing more than a bad memory, maybe, or at least a lessons learned and a retrospective that we can use to advance and create better technology next time around. But the stuff that we can go out and buy at Amazon or Best Buy is already at like technology readiness level 7, 8, 9. Now, in 2015, there was an effort by the Air Force to say, can we take that TRL and turn it into something specifically focused around training? So this is not technology readiness level, but training effectiveness readiness level. Okay, so TERL. This really wasn't proven to be effective. It wasn't created in a true like formative research project. It hasn't gotten widespread adoption, and that's why we're not seeing it in industry either. So just bringing this up that we did do a lot of evaluation in this space in order to determine, do frameworks exist to help people evaluate technology for training and effectiveness, and some do. None of them are broadly applicable. So what we did was we decided that we wanted to come up around the concepts that make learning and development different in business, specifically in enterprise, in for-profit businesses, and even in nonprofit businesses, but as opposed to childhood education, pedagogy, as opposed to, say, for example, government technology readiness. We wanted to have something that was focused around professional development and talent development. So we came up with this concept of the builds framework in order to build your workforce, in order to build learners for this 2025 workforce. How do you move forward with evaluating technologies? And so it's a very simple and easy to remember anagram. We've got business needs, user experience, impact, learning models, dependencies, and signals. So you can write that down, use it. It's widely available throughout the book. I mean, it is the main thread for the entire book, but we'll go into what these actually mean here as part of a deep dive. So when we're talking about business needs or business value, it would be very easy to fall into the old trap of saying, oh, this is just simply ROI. Yeah, we're talking about ROI. And what I want to shy away from thinking about this in a very simple view like ROI, even though ROI is extremely difficult to truly calculate with learning technologies in general, notoriously so. It's not a simple mathematical calculation as though some people would have you believe it is. What I really want to have you understand is that business value, it doesn't always equate to dollars and cents in a true one-to-one ratio. What we're talking about here is the business value might be perception. It might be position in a marketplace. It might be marketing opportunities. It might be availability to mitigate or reduce risks to your business in a downstream fashion. These are the types of things that we want to consider when we're talking about business value, not just, hey, if I put this technology out here, will it make my workers 15% more effective or productive or something like that. It might be, we'll be able to attract a whole new crowd of people that want to work for our business, or we'll be able to leapfrog the competition by moving to 2 generations ahead of them in their overall technology landscape, or we'll be able to future-proof our company against privacy and GDPR regulations by changing how our identity providers work or something like that. It could be very different than just simply a mathematical calculation. From a user experience perspective, we want you to evaluate the technology in order to make sure that it is taking advantage of the affordances that the devices offer, right? If it's just simply moving stuff to a smaller screen or changing it so that you query the system with your voice as opposed to typing something in, it's not really actually advancing the overall user experience, right? We want to make sure that this is designed with a human-centered approach. We want to make sure that it works within the flow of the activity that the workers have. We want to make sure that it's accessible and inclusive, and we want to make sure that the devices and the tools are secure, right? And that it adheres to an overall user experience that models how people live and work. And now as we're living and working at home and in the same place, it's pretty blurry in terms of how Amazon's Alexa device should work versus how our company's LMS should work, right? And these are the types of cues that we should be looking at and saying, when we put new technology out there for our learners to use, are we actually improving their day-to-day? Are we being reflective and responsive in terms of understanding how they live and framing up technology in a way that allows them to take how they live and make it part of how they work? These are the types of things that we should be striving for as we introduce new technologies. The impact is really, really interesting, especially now as we consider how things have been dramatically reshaped in the last couple months. You know, what we want to take a look at is there is obviously personal impact, there's work group impact, there's organizational impact, and then there's the industry and the vertical that you impact, and then there's the enterprise in general at large that you impact, and then there's also even nationwide and global impact. So when we talk about something like Zoom meetings or StreamYard or GoToMeetings or whatever else happening everywhere all the time, that impact is, one, we don't have to drive as much, we don't have to go anywhere, so our carbon footprint is also is reducing, but we're soaking up tons of bandwidth. We're putting servers at strain. I'm sure that probably everybody here is probably, if you work in a company where you have VPNs, your VPN is being put to test like never before, right? And so these are the types of impacts that we can take a look at. We can also take a look at how this technology could be used ethically. You know, is it harvesting our data? If you aren't paying for the product, you probably are the product. Those types of considerations. And does that fit within your organization's overall ethical, moral, societal role? And we cover off in that area in the book quite extensively. From a learning models perspective, this is also a very interesting dynamic that we should be tracking against. If your company has never been able to successfully try social because you're not a social organization, you don't chat, you don't have an informal learning plan, trying to cram a brand new technology platform that is 100% social is going to fail unless you have ways to warm the plate, unless you have programs and communications and other things that go along with it in order to make it more attractive and useful and usable for everybody else. So we want to make sure that as we introduce new technologies, that if it doesn't support or use learning models already in place in your organization, that you have accompanying communications and programs that help prop that up. This is really, really important, because otherwise what happens is technology gets introduced as if it's going to be the savior, the magic bullet, something along those lines. And when it fails, then everybody gets gun shy and they say, well, it didn't work 3 years ago when we tried it, or we can't do that again because we spent so much money on it that we're not going to go back into that area again until things dramatically reshape it. And so what we ask for you to do in this area, in this specific part of the framework, is take a look how people currently are learning inside your organization, and either choose technologies that reinforce and strengthen those learning models, or if you are bringing new learning models to the forefront and bringing those into your workforce, say, for example, expecting people to understand their concept of context, where, when, and what they're doing, that you have communication around that helps them understand why that's important, how it helps them, what the solving for the what's in it for me part of the equation. Dependencies is something that I think is oftentimes overlooked, and when it is considered, the unfortunate part I find is that dependencies are seen as a barrier to getting technology rolled out, as opposed to an enabler or a possibility or an opportunity creator. And so when we talk about dependencies, and we're talking about things that might need to be put in place in order for a technology to succeed. So I mentioned VPNs. So if you've got workers that are remote, but you still have need for secure transactions that take place between the user and servers that are on premise at the office, if you don't have VPN, you're probably going to have difficulties making your workforce instantly remote, right? If you have laptops and you have custom framework, or I'm sorry, firmware that has disabled their webcam for security purposes, you're going to have an awfully hard time rescinding that and moving to a remote workforce where everybody's expected to be on camera and having these personal Zoom meetings and so on and so forth. So we can talk about those as being inhibitors, but we can also talk about them as being enablers. And where I go with that is, if you talk about, say, for example, a tool, an application like Uber, the dependencies are how all of these combinations, the recombinant innovation, interacts with each other. Uber is by itself an application, but it's so much more than that, in the sense that it is an app that has support for geolocation, a payment system, real-world interaction with cab drivers. It's got a companion application for those drivers and the administrators and the passengers. There are so many things that interact with each other that make that type of thing, that type of application work. And when we see very well-designed mobile learning applications, we're seeing those same sorts of dependencies as well. It's an app that's aware of where you are, when you're accessing it, and the intent and the reason why you would be accessing those types of information. So the dependencies are what makes the magic happen, right? It can be a showstopper. Your IT team or your technologists could say, we can't do this because of X, Y, and Z things not being fulfilled. Or you can look at it and say, now that we have these cool affordances in these devices and in these tools, we can do all these other things that we wouldn't have been able to do before. Okay, so these are the kind of the double-edged sword of the dependencies. And when I talk about technology and tracking it and trying to keep some level of understanding of where things are, understanding and reading signals is so very, very important. Okay, and where we go to read and find these signals helps us stay ahead of the game. And there are a lot of sources that you can use to get information about technology. Obviously, attending webinars like this is a great way. Learning at home and connecting with the communities. Social groups like Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups where people are tracking and talking about new and emerging technologies, especially for use in learning, is a good place. But there are a lot of publications, and there's consumer-facing publications like Wired Magazine or The Verge or Vox.com that a lot of people might read, and you see these things shared in your news feed, or maybe you look at them in your Apple News or your Flipboard application, or you subscribe to their updates. So those are good. Those are good. There are the associations like eLearning Guild and ATD and a variety of groups like that. That are also good because they will bring you some information. But then there is like the undercurrent, right? The more geeky technology mags like ARS Technica, subreddits, various subreddits on technologies. Like there's an augmented reality subreddit that's very valuable, that has a lot of stuff. There's associations that are niche. So there's one called The Area, AREA.org, thearea.org. That's an augmented reality for enterprise association. These are all good. But one thing that we want to do is understand that those are probably all still tracking technologies that are at like a TRL 6, 7, 8, 9. Like those are technologies that are ready for adoption, maybe already available on the market, or if they're not already on the market, they will be very soon. Where I like to go to take a look at it from a future perspective is I go to where research is recently being published, right? So I take a look at organizations and universities and government agencies that have reputations for being the vanguard. So I look at ADL's white papers. I attend and go to their conferences like ITSEC and iFest and things of that nature. I take a look at the publications that are taking place and getting out there with organizations and conferences like EDUCAUSE. I go to new and exciting webinars and sessions hosted by those types of organizations. But even more so, I take a look at what those organizations are also soliciting as their research, because that gives you a pretty good idea of where things are going to be 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. When you take a look at the Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIRS, like I mentioned, and you see what those areas are promoting, those are the types of signals that you can use to inform what you'll be doing 2, 3, 5, 7 years down the road. And that's very, very exciting stuff. So again, to recap, builds business needs, user experience, impact, learning models, dependencies, and signals. These 6 items will help you understand how to place better, more effective, and potentially more successful bets in your business life for evaluating and leveraging new technologies. Now, what's very handy in the book is, in addition to a chapter on each one of these, there is a rubric at the end of the book that provides 5 key questions that you can ask yourself of those technologies for each one of these areas: business, user experience, and so on. So the thing that's also really interesting is a builds analysis for augmented reality in and of itself is not really useful. A builds analysis of augmented reality, even for your industry, is also not particularly useful. I mean, it's better than none. A builds analysis for AR in your organization, more useful. a builds analysis for technology for use in a specific department or job role or task in your organization is the most useful, right? So technology, especially as we move forward now, is becoming so highly personal, right? It's customized, it's contextual, it understands who we are, it's taking a look at our intent, it's deciphering our past history, it's understanding where it is in the world and what your job role is. This is why builds analysis should be done as close to the audience that is going to be using that technology as possible, right? The closer you can get to understanding who it is that's going to be using that technology, why they would use it, et cetera, you're going to be able to understand what the impact is, what the learning models are that it needs to support, and all of those other types of things. Dependencies, of course, right? If you're going to be deploying cloud-based technology, but 3/4 of your workforce in this particular use case have up and down internet connections, you better understand that this is going to have to support an offline or a semi-connected mode, for example. So these are the types of things that we want to do when we're talking about doing a builds analysis. Is it should be as close to the boots on the ground or the people that are going to be using that technology as possible in order to make it more effective. So when I take a look at augmented reality, we go and say it's not just about AR, but it's about this individual here that's pictured on the screen, a service technician. Their use of AR is going to be vastly different than the person that's selling that same technology, or the person that is asked to assemble that technology versus repair that technology, or to troubleshoot that technology versus design that technology. Every one of those individuals is going to use augmented reality for that particular product or service differently than they would. If you are a service technician and you're installing versus repairing it, you're also going to have different types of business values, right? The way that you are measured for repair versus install might be different, right? Install is about how quickly can we get it done and how low is the defect rate. In the repair perspective is how effectively are you stocking and putting the parts in your truck as you go out there in order to make sure that you are repairing only the stuff that you need and you're not using unnecessary parts, basically taking a shotgun approach to your repair, for example. When we talk about car dealerships, the reason that augmented reality would be useful for a salesperson, very different than the person that works in the service department, right? And so this concept of one-stop shop and the type of kind of big macro solution that L&D always tries to go for becomes very, very fraught with peril and problematic when we start to look at using a builds analysis for that technology. We quickly recognize that it's AR or something like that is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a one-stop shop. It is something that has to be personalized and should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. In the hospitality industry, same thing is, if you were going to be using AR and you're a concierge, very different. You might want to know, have some level of facial recognition or understanding of who the person is and be able to pull up the information so that you know if they're a high roller at your casino versus, a noob, right? If you're a cleaning person or an hourly person that's tasked with repairing and making sure that the facilities are in tip-top shape, that's vastly different than that concierge person, right? So a lot of variance and variability in terms of understanding what the value is to be added to that. So the book is filled with that type of stuff. The book is out there. It's on the shelves right now. You can either order it off of Amazon or ATD website. I think it's about $30. It's also available for Kindle. And I think they have a PDF version of it available off of ATD as well. So I will kind of just wrap there and make some time for questions. But you can also reach out to me directly, chadyu@gowithfloat.com, and also Visual Rinse on Twitter. And I'm happy to talk technology, emerging technology. I'm happy to talk AR, mobile, machine learning, any of those types of things that my company at gowithfloat.com does. But I'm also just happy to just shoot the breeze. So let me know how I can help you, and I will turn it over to Ann to see if we've got any questions or conversations that we might want to have.
There we go. I remember to unmute myself. That's part of the using technology as well, right? Remembering when you've muted yourself and unmuted yourself. So thank
Yes.
you so much for that insightful session. And I really liked what you had to say about, business value doesn't always equate to dollars. And oftentimes that's the only thing that companies look at. And so by giving those other examples of what else is valuable to a company by using a technology was great. And then also giving those applications, right, how AR can be applied, because again, AR, VR is so cool right now and people think we've got to use it, and it may not be the case, but then you gave them some really great studies on where you could apply AR and effectively. So we will include the link to your book on Amazon as well in the comments. I've also shared it on Twitter. So if you've not been able to grab a copy of Chad's book yet, please do so, and then, get all of the insights in further detail that he shared today on the Learning Collective session. And if you're watching the replay, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to pop it in, and we'll make sure that Chad gets the question and gets back with you. And thank you again for your time today, Chad, and your generous share of your time and sharing what your insights and experiences are with emerging technology.
I've been so happy to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm really passionate about this, and I love getting a chance to share it. So I was looking forward to being able to give this type of talk here at Learning Solutions, and also reaching out and meet and seeing folks at ATD in Denver here in May. And any chance to get out and speak with folks is always welcome. And like I said in the presentation, if you would like to have this type of conversation with me for your organization, or even a tailored presentation like this, I'm happy to do that too. It's not that I have a ton of time on my hands right now, but any way that I can get down and talk about this type of stuff and not be subjected to the craziness of my 3 kids upstairs that are going stir crazy from all the e-learning at home and the homeschooling is a good thing in my book. So very happy to be here.
Well, we can definitely tell that you are passionate about this topic, and so it just makes your sharing your information even more engaging and fun too. So good luck with the 3 kids and the e-learning and the Zoom meetings and all that, as with most people out there viewing this. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. This session will again remain on our Facebook page, and will also be available on our YouTube channel by the end of the week, so it can be easily accessed at your favorite social media platform. Thanks again, and thank you, Chad, and we'll see you here this afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern for Judy Katz's session, Wonder Woman. I knew I was going to mess up the title. It's www, making your e-learning representative. So we'll see you back here shortly. Thanks again. Bye.
Super. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.